Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to add player farming system to your own project. So to get started, we're going to right click the player farming system folder, hit migrate, then OK. Then you're going to go to your project folder, so mine is on my desktop. Then find your content folder. Once you're in there, hit select folder and give it a second to copy over those files. Once that's done, you can head over to your project and you should have the player farming system in the content folder. Now this is going to be a general guide on how to add player farming system to other projects. I'm going to be using the third person template that comes with Unreal Engine, but you can follow this process in your own project. Just keep in mind that depending on your project there may be some differences. So to get started, we're going to head to Edit, then go to Project Settings, then to the Collision tab. We're going to add a new object channel and we're going to call it Placement and hit Accept, then a new trace channel. This is going to be called Light, then hit Accept, then another new trace channel. This is going to be called Preview and then hit Accept. Then we're going to open up the preset and we're going to click New, and this is going to be called Placement Preview, spelled exactly how I've spelt it there. We're going to set this to Query Only, World Dynamic. Now we're going to tick the overlap option at the top here and then set it to ignore all of the trace channels and then block the placement. Now depending on your project you may have additional settings in here. If you're not sure what to set them to, then I recommend just setting them to ignore. Then we're going to hit accept. We're going to create a new channel, a new profile, and this is going to be called Plant. It's going to be set to collision enabled and it's going to be set to world dynamic. Then we're going to tick ignore at the top here and we're going to set it to block visibility, world static, world dynamic, and also destruction and placement. And again, for your other channels, if you're not sure what to do with them, just hit ignore, then hit accept. We're going to add another option here, and this is going to be called destroyed plant. And we're going to set this to collision enabled, then object type world dynamic. We're going to set it to ignore everything apart from the world static and world dynamic, which we want to block, then hit accept. Now open up the pawn by just double clicking it, and we want it to ignore both preview and light, then hit accept. Do the same thing character mesh, we want to ignore preview and light and then hit accept, and the same thing with trigger, ignore preview and light and hit accept. Next you're going to want to go to your game mode. So for me that's going to be in the third person blueprints and then third person game mode. For you that will be whatever game mode you're using for your game. So open that up and I'll just bring it over from my other screen, and if you've got this view just click open full blueprint editor and give it a second to load. Once you're in here, we're going to add a new component, so click the add and search for farming. Then we want farming game mode component, and then go to class settings, and under interfaces you will either have an add button here or here, just click whichever one you have. Click add and search for farming, and you want to find the farming game mode interface and select that, then compile. Next we're going to go to the content browser and we're going to go to the player farming system, blueprints, character, and open up the farming game mode, and I'll just bring it over from my other screen. And in here we're going to go to the event graph and we're just going to copy these nodes here and paste them into our new game mode. This might take a second to load, so there we go. Once you've pasted that in, we're going to open up the interfaces and you can see we've got a grayed out variable. Just right click it, do create variable. Then with that variable selected, we're going to add farming to the beginning of the name just so we know that this is the farming save system, and then compile. Then we're going to go to the interfaces tab, then game mode, and we'll start at the bottom with the get save system, just open that up. Then we're going to get the farming save system variable we just created, plug that in here. Then go to lights, open up get directional lights, grab the farming game mode component, drag out from that and do get directional lights and plug that in here. Then I'm just going to copy our farming game mode component because we're going to reuse that. Go to get is night, paste it in and do get is night. Then go to the rain and we want get is raining. Again, paste that in, drag out and do get is raining. We want the variable here, plug that into the output, and then we also want to get rain amount and plug that in here. Then go to components, get farming game mode component, paste it in and just connect it to the return node. Now we're going to go scroll up and select override, and we're going to search for spawn, and we want spawn default pawn at transform. So we'll select that. That's going to override that function for us. We'll go back to our farming game mode, and in the functions, go to game and open up spawn default pawn at transform. And we're just going to copy all of this code, Control C, and in here, we're just going to paste that in. So Control V. We're going to take this node here and just move it to the beginning of the function. And I'm just going to connect it up to our change name node there. Now we're just going to go through and replace some of these variables. So if we scroll down, get our farming save system and get that here, plug it into the isValid. And we're just going to do that wherever we have these save system variables. So delete this old one. Then here, we're just going to drag our farming save system, do set farming save system, delete this grayed out node, and we'll connect this up where it was. So just up to the get node here and up to true like that. And we will just copy and paste that node here as well. Connect that to our spawn actor node. Delete this and make sure you connect this back up to here. Then here, we'll just get another get for our farming save system, plug that in here, delete that. And do the same here, so I'll just copy and paste this, plug it into the target, and then we're going to right click the player save data and do create local variable, and then do the same thing with new character, do create local variable. And now we can compile and we shouldn't have any errors. Now, depending on your project, you may already have a spawn default pawn at transform function, and you may already have your own code in there. If you do, you're going to have to integrate this code into your already existing code. I don't have instructions for that because that would depend on the code that you already have there. But if you don't already have this function in your project and we've just set that up, that's fine. We can now compile our game mode and save it, and we're all finished in here. Next, you're going to want to go to your player controller. Now, I'm using the third person template, and this doesn't actually have its own controller. So if you're in the same boat and you don't have a controller for your character, that's fine. You can just use the controller that comes with the farming system. So in your game mode, just go class defaults and set the player controller class to the BP farming controller like that. And you can just use the farming controller. Now, if you do have your own controller, I'll quickly show you how to set that up. So we'll just go to the content browser, and you don't need to do this. I'm just doing it because I don't have a controller. I'm just going to create a new controller blueprint. So blueprint class, player controller. I'll call this BP underscore example controller, and open that up. So once you're inside your controller, you want to go to the components and search for farming. And you want to add the player farming component like that, and then compile it. Then we're going to go back to the content browser, and in the player farming system blueprints character folder, open up the farming controller. And in here you can see we've got these nodes that are highlighted. So I'm just going to copy these and then paste them into our controller. I'm just going to delete these grayed out nodes because we're not using those. We'll paste that in. You can see we've got those nodes in here. Now, when you paste these in, if this node isn't there for you, or if it's errored or doesn't look the same, that means your controller already has this node somewhere in it. So if that's the case, you'll need to look through your controller and find where this node is, and then connect these nodes up to it. But if you don't already have this node, it should look like this, and then we're ready to just compile and save this. Then just in your game mode, make sure that you've got your controller class set here. So mine's set to the farming controller, but I'll just set it to the example controller now like that, and compile and save your game mode. Now the next part is we're going to go to our character. So this is the character that is from your project. So for me, that's going to be the third person character. I'm going to open that up. And the first thing we're going to do is go to the class settings, then again to interfaces, whichever add button you have, just click that and search for farming. And we want the farming character interface. So just click that and then compile. Now we're going to go back to the content browser and we're going to open up the farming character. And again, that's in the player farming system, blueprints, character, and then farming character. And we're going to copy some code from this. So we'll start by going to the event graph, then begin play. We're going to want to copy these nodes here. So Control C, go back to your character and paste those in up here. And we'll move it here. Now, when you paste these in, if this node doesn't look the same, or if it's errored or just isn't there, that means that your character already has an event possessed node in it. And like before I said in the controller, you'll need to find that node and connect these nodes to the event possessed that you already have in your character. If it looks like this, then you're fine. You don't have one in your character yet. So next we're going to right click our player farming component, do create variable, compile, and then with it selected, we want to make sure that we change replication to replicated. This is very important, make sure you do it, then compile again. Now the next part is purely optional. I'm going to be adding the first person camera from our farming character to my third person character blueprint. And you can follow this if you want to. If you already have your camera set up, then you don't need to worry about this. I'm also going to be adding in the ability to toggle between the third and first person. And again, you don't have to follow that if you don't want to. So to start with, we're going to go to our farming character. I'm just going to copy my first person camera here, so Control C. Go to the third person character, select our capsule component here, and then paste it in. Now, maybe you have a first person character and you want to add the third person camera. Well, you would do the same thing. Instead, you would just copy the spring arm and the third person camera, copy those and then paste them into your character. But mine's a third person character already, so I'm just going to leave it as is, and then we'll compile. Now we're going to create a couple of new functions to toggle between our cameras. So I'm going to create a new function, call this enter first person view, and it needs to be spelled exactly like I have here. And in here, we're going to go to our farming character, open up the enter first person view, and just copy all of these nodes, then paste them in. And we'll take our beginning node, connect that up to deactivate. Then we're going to replace these nodes. So our third person character is the follow camera. So we're going to plug that into deactivate, delete the grayed out node. And then our first person is just called camera. So we'll plug that into target here, delete this grayed out node again. Then here we're going to right click and do create variable and compile. Now we're going to create another function just called enter third person view. Like that. Go back to the farming character, enter third person view, copy the nodes, back in our character, paste in those nodes, connect this up to our deactivate, and then this time we want the first person camera, so we'll plug that in here, and we want our third person camera, so plug that in here, and delete the grayed out one, and then we can compile. So that's pretty much all of the code required to be able to toggle our camera. Now we're going to create a couple more functions for saving and loading the player data. So we're going to create a new function here, and it's going to be called save player data, spelled how I've spelled it here. Add a new input, call this save data, again exactly how I've spelled it, and the type will be farming save object, and then select object reference like that. Compile, go to the farming character, open up saving, then save player data, and we're just going to copy all of this and paste it into our new function. Take the beginning node, plug that into isValid, right click this player save data and do create local variable, and then compile. Then create a new function, this is going to be called load player data, and again create a new input, set its name to save data, and again set the type to farming save object reference, and then compile. Then go to the farming character, open up load player data, and we're just going to copy all of these nodes here and paste them into our new function. Take the beginning node here and plug that into the isValid like that, and then we're going to right click player save data, do create local variable. Then moving along, right click new character and do create local variable, and then compile. Next we're going to go to the class settings, and then we're going to add another interface. So again, it will either be an add button here or here. Click the add and search for save. We want the farming save interface, and then compile. And then we're going to go to the farming character, then to the event graph, and we're just going to copy this saving collapse node here and go to the third person character, then event graph, and we're going to paste that in here. We'll move it up here, and then we can compile. And you can rename this if you want, just to be called saving, like that, and then compile again. One other thing that you might want to add if you're using the camera toggle that we added a little bit earlier is in the farming character, if you head to begin play, we've got these nodes here that basically change the camera's view depending on what the camera type is when the game starts. So this is how you would choose if you enter first or third person when the game starts. We're just going to copy these nodes here, go to our character. Now, if you already have a begin play node in your character, you're going to want to add this code to that code. So for me, I'm just going to paste that in here and attach it to this node here. If you don't already have a begin play node, just right click, search for event begin play, create that node, and then plug it into our switch node here. Again, if you're not using the camera setup that we made a little bit earlier, you don't need to do this. Now for the next bit, we're going to be adding in our key inputs so we can have the player press keys and it will do certain actions. So we'll head to our farming character, then go to the event graph, then go to inputs, and in here is where all of our key inputs are. So for example, this section here is all of the key inputs for the different numbers, being able to select different farming objects. If you don't want this in your character, you don't have to add it. I am going to add it to mine just for the sake of it. So we'll copy and we'll paste this into our character. I'm just going to paste it in over here. But if you don't want these, you don't have to have them. Then heading back to our farming character, we have the more important inputs here. Now, one thing to note, if you chose not to add the camera toggle system that I created a little bit earlier, you won't want to copy this section here. So just move this out of the way. If you did add the camera toggle, then just keep that in here. So just something to keep in mind. Then we're going to highlight all of these, Control C, and add these to our character. So I'll just paste it in down here like that. Just move it sort of in line here. Now this is where all of our more important keybinds are for things like placing, farming objects, rotating them, different things like watering, harvesting. All of these inputs are in here. So if you want to change any of these keybinds, this is where you'd find them. Now, because we're adding to your already existing character, you may already have keybinds that have the same key as ones we've just pasted in. So some of these might not work if you already have another, say, tab node, for example, running other code. If you select the nodes here, you can see there's a consume input. If you untick this on both of the nodes that are the same key, then this will allow both of them to run when you say press tab, for example. If you don't untick these, then only one of them will run. So that's just something to keep in mind if you already have a lot of keybinds in your character, for example. Now, next we're going to go, I'll just delete this node here. We're going to go to our interfaces. So interfaces, then character, camera, and open up the PFS character camera. Now, this node is very important. Even if you're not using the camera system that we set up earlier, you must provide your current camera here, and ideally your spring arm if you're using one, and also whether your character's first person or third person. So for us, we're going to grab the camera boom, and this is the camera spring arm for our third person. Just plug that in here. If you have your own camera setup, this is where you'd plug in your spring arm for your third person camera. Then we need the current camera. So for us, we're going to use a select node. So we'll just drag down, get the camera type, drag out from that and do a select node. And this will allow us to just change which camera is provided depending on our camera view. So I'm going to plug this into current camera. Then for our first person, we're just going to grab the camera, and third person is our follow camera, like that. And then we're also just going to copy paste this and plug that into our camera type. If, say, for example, you have your own camera system and it's only first person, then just plug your first person camera into current camera and leave this as first person. If you just have a third person camera, then plug that in here and just set this to third person. And if you have your own system for toggling cameras, you'll need to do something similar to how I've set this up to provide the different camera depending on your camera view. Next, we'll just compile and we're going to go back to the content browser. Now, because we've migrated Player Farming System, some of its collision settings might have changed. So we're just going to check a few of those now. So we'll just go to the Player Farming System. Then we're going to search for the master farming actor. Open that up. And in class defaults, find the collision category under farming settings. Make sure this is set to light. So we'll change that to light, compile and save this. Then in the content browser, we'll search for player farming component, and that should be here. We'll open that up. Then go to class defaults, and again in the section here, find farming settings, collision, and our top one here should be visibility, so that's correct. This one should be preview, so if yours isn't, set it to preview. This one here should be set to placement, so I'm going to change that to placement, like that. Then we'll compile and save this. Then we'll go back to the content browser and I'm going to search for the master plant, and we'll open up the master plant, then go to class defaults, and again in farming settings collision, our first one here should be set to placement, so I'm going to change this to placement. The second one should be set to preview, so I'm going to set this to preview, and then this one should be set to light, which it is, so we can compile and save this now. Then go back to the content browser and search for light detector. We'll just open that up. And again, class defaults, then we want the collision here under detection settings. Make sure this is set to light, which it is. Then we can check the warmth detector component, open that up. And again, collision, class defaults, collision, and make sure this is set to light, which is for me. So now we can actually test this out. I'm gonna go to our showcase level and hit play. You can see that by default it's going to first person, but if I press V I can toggle between my first and third person view. If I press tab we can bring up the farming menu. I can select my different farming objects. We can snap them together. If I select say the carrot, I can place those in there. And all of our controls are working correctly. If I press K, you can see we've got our control list as well. So that's pretty much it on how to integrate Player Farming System into your own project. There are a couple more things I was going to cover in this video. So the first one being, if you did follow along with adding in our first person camera so we can toggle between third and first person, there's a couple of changes you might want to make. So if we change our number of players to 2 and set this to play as client, then we'll hit play. And with our client selected, if I move forward and I look around, you can see that my camera or my character doesn't actually change its direction that it's looking on other players' screens. So if that's something you want, we can do that pretty easily. We'll just go to our third person character here. I'm going to right click and do a new custom event. I'm going to call it server change camera. And I'm going to set it to run on server, reliable, tick on. Then create a new input and we'll call this first person camera, like that, and then we'll compile. Then drag out from first person camera and do set use controller rotation yaw. And this is what will make our character face in the direction that our camera is pointing. You can also add additional code here if you want to for changing the way the character moves when entering or exiting first person. That's up to you. Then we're going to go to our first person view function. We'll drag out from here and do server change camera. And we'll tick this on because we're in first person view. We'll copy this, go to our third person view, paste this in, and just untick that like that. And now we can test this out. I'll hit play, give it a second to load. Select our client here, and if I move forward and I look around, you can see on my other player screen, I'm looking around in the direction. Now, one thing that might look a bit weird depending on your animation setup is if I move side to side, you can see that it's playing the forward animation. Now, that's only happening because the third person template I'm using just has forward and backwards animations. It doesn't have side to side, but most projects will, and yours probably does as well. But that's just something to keep in mind. That's why it's doing that. Of course, this change is completely optional, so it's up to you whether you want to include this or not. And then lastly, I wanted to just point out some of the important functions that you may want to add code to depending on your project. Maybe you have your own inventory system and you want to be able to add and remove items to that inventory. For those functions, we're going to go to the player farming system. Just going to get rid of this search, go to blueprints, components, and then to the player farming component. And in here is where all of our functions are for managing our resources. So this is where we have all of the functions for checking that we have enough resources to place an object. That's done in the check placement here. You can see that we actually have these nodes highlighted with some information about adding your own inventory. We also have a function that then deducts the resource cost of placing our object. So that's done in here. If you wanted to find the function responsible for when the player harvests a plant, you can search for harvest, and we've got the harvest vegetable function here. And in here is where we will get the resources that the plant has, and then in here we'll add our resources to the player farming component. So this would be another good place where if you wanted to add custom items to your own inventory, you could do that in here. So that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below. And don't forget to check out the documentation. There's loads more info about all of the different features in the system.